The burn of cheap liquor on my tongue and the sting of acrid smoke in my lungs was as familiar to me as the worn grips of my trusty pulse rifle. The dive bar on Ganymede Station wasn't much to look at. Neon signs, cracked synth leather booths, the pervasive stink of sweat and despair, but it was a haven in this godforsaken quadrant of the galaxy. I was halfway through my third shot of rotgut when he slid into the booth opposite me. His trench coat was threadbare, but it hung with an air of authority. The scar that bisected his face from brow to chin only added to his intimidating aura. "They call you Razor," he said, his voice a low growl. "Quite a reputation you've carved out for yourself." I raised an eyebrow, taking a swig from my glass. "Depends who you ask. You buying, or are you just here to admire my infamy?" He ignored my barb, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "I've got a proposition," he said, sliding a datapad across the table. "A job. High risk, high reward. The kind of thing only a desperate man would take." I picked up the datapad, scrolling through the encrypted file. The details were sparse, but the payout was astronomical, enough to buy myself a new ship, a new identity, maybe even a new lease on life. Or a quick death. I looked up at the stranger, weighing my options. "What's the catch?" I asked, the question barely audible over the din of the bar. He leaned forward, his breath hot against my face. "The catch, my friend, is that you might not live to spend it." I slammed my glass down on the table, the sound piercing through the sudden silence of the bar. "Sounds like my kind of gig," I said, a wry grin spreading across my face. "You got yourself a deal." The stranger's lips curled into a sinister smile. "Welcome aboard, Razor. You won't regret this." A week later, I found myself on the grimy docks of Ganymede Station, hauling my duffel bag towards a rust bucket freighter that looked like it had barely survived the last asteroid belt. The stranger, whose name I learned was Captain Callus, had given me the coordinates and a cryptic warning. "Keep your head down, your weapon handy, and don't trust anyone." Sage advice for a life like mine. I clambered up the rickety gangplank, my boots clanging on the metal grating. The ship's interior was a maze of corridors and cramped quarters. The air was filled with the aroma of machine oil, stale sweat, and something else. Something alien and vaguely unsettling. I found my way to the mess hall, where a motley crew of mercenaries and malcontents were gathered around a battered table. A hulking brute with a cybernetic arm was arguing with a wiry spacer sporting a mohawk and a pair of mirrored shades. A reptilian humanoid sat in the corner, its eyes glowing with an unnerving intensity. Callus was seated at the head of the table, a datapad in hand. He looked up as I entered, recognition in his eyes. "Ah, Razor," he said, rising to his feet. "Welcome aboard the Dark Star." He gestured towards the crew. "Allow me to introduce you to our esteemed colleagues." He pointed to the brute. "This is Bruiser, our muscle. Don't let the cybernetics fool you. He can tear you apart with his bare hands." Bruiser grunted in acknowledgement, his eyes scanning me with a predatory gleam. Callus continued, indicating the spacer. "This is Chip, our tech specialist. He can fix anything, hack anything, and blow up anything, a valuable asset to say the least." Chip flashed a grin, revealing a set of sharpened teeth. "Pleasure to make your acquaintance, Razor. Heard you're quite the sharpshooter." I nodded, my hand instinctively drifting towards my pulse rifle. Callus cleared his throat, drawing our attention back to him. "As you can see, we're a diverse group, but we share a common goal, to get rich and stay alive. And we believe that this mission will help us achieve both." He tapped the datapad. "Our objective is to intercept a transport vessel belonging to the Obsidian Syndicate. They're carrying a valuable cargo, something they're very eager to keep secret." A murmur of excitement rippled through the crew. Callus raised a hand, silencing the chatter. "This is a high-risk operation. We'll be facing heavily armed guards and advanced security systems, but the reward is worth the danger. And I have faith in this crew. We're the best in the business, and we'll get the job done." He looked at each of us in turn, his eyes lingering on me. "Are you with me?" I met his gaze, my resolve hardening. "I'm in," I said. "Let's bring home the prize." The days that followed were filled with non-stop preparation and anticipation. Chip spent countless hours hunched over his console, analyzing the Obsidian Syndicate's security protocols and plotting our course through their territory. Bruiser honed his combat skills in the training room, his cybernetic arm whirring as he pulverized training dummies. I spent my time familiarizing myself with the ship's layout and weaponry, cleaning and polishing my pulse rifle until it gleamed in the dim light. I also made an effort to get to know my fellow crewmates, though it was clear that trust was a rare commodity in this line of work. Bruiser was a man of few words, preferring to communicate through grunts and the occasional menacing glare. Chip was more affable, always eager to share his latest technical discovery or crack a morbid joke. Callus was a different story. He was a master of manipulation, weaving tales of past glories and future riches to keep the crew motivated and obedient. But beneath his charismatic facade, I sensed a darkness, a ruthlessness that made me wary. As we neared the Obsidian Syndicate's territory, the tension on board the Dark Star grew. One evening, as I was polishing my rifle in my quarters, Callus entered without knocking. He leaned against the bulkhead, his arms crossed, his eyes fixed on me. "Nervous, Razor?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. I shrugged. "Just making sure I'm ready for whatever comes our way." He nodded approvingly. "Good. You'll need to be. This won't be a walk in the park." He paused, his expression turning somber. "I know you're new to this crew, but I've been watching you. You've got potential. You're resourceful, adaptable, and you don't shy away from danger. Those are valuable traits in this business." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his sudden praise. "What are you getting at, Captain?" He smiled, a predatory glint in his eyes. "I'm getting at the fact that I need someone I can trust. Someone who can handle themselves in a tight spot. Someone who won't hesitate to make the hard decisions." He stepped closer, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm talking about someone who could one day take my place, lead this crew to even greater heights." I met his gaze, my heart pounding in my chest. Was this a genuine offer or a test? I couldn't be sure. "I appreciate the vote of confidence, Captain," I said, choosing my words carefully. "But I'm just here to do my job. Get in, get the cargo, get out. Anything beyond that is, well, it's not my concern." Callus chuckled, patting me on the shoulder. "Don't sell yourself short, Razor. You're capable of much more than you realize. Just remember, loyalty is rewarded. Betrayal is punished, severely." With that, he turned and left my quarters, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The Obsidian Syndicate's transport vessel, a hulking behemoth of metal and weaponry, materialized on our scopes as we dropped out of hyperspace. It was escorted by a squadron of fighter craft, their engines glowing like predatory eyes in the void. "Showtime!" Callus said, his voice amplified through the ship's comms. "Chip, disable their communications. Bruiser, prepare the boarding party. Razor, you're with me." I grabbed my rifle and followed Callus to the hangar bay, where a heavily modified shuttle awaited. Bruiser and 2 other mercenaries were already strapped in. "This is it, boys," Callus said, buckling himself into the pilot's seat. "Let's make some history." He ignited the shuttle's engines and we blasted off towards the transport vessel, weaving through a hail of laser fire from the escort fighters. Chip's jamming signal had disrupted their targeting systems, but they were still a formidable threat. Callus expertly maneuvered the shuttle, dodging and weaving through the enemy fire. The cockpit shuddered with each near miss. "Hold on tight!" Callus yelled over the sound of the engines. "We're going in!" He plunged the shuttle towards the transport vessel's underbelly, firing grappling hooks that latched onto the hull. The shuttle lurched to a halt, and the boarding party scrambled out, weapons at the ready. We breached the airlock, guns blazing. The Obsidian Syndicate's guards were caught off guard, but they quickly rallied, returning fire with deadly accuracy. The corridor erupted into a chaotic firefight, laser blasts ricocheting off the metal walls. I took cover behind a crate, squeezing off shots at the enemy. Bruiser charged forward, his cybernetic arm deflecting blaster bolts as he closed in on the guards. The mercenaries fought with ruthless efficiency, mowing down anyone who stood in their way. We fought our way through the ship, clearing each compartment with brutal precision. The screams of the wounded and dying traveled through the corridors. We finally reached the cargo hold, where the Obsidian Syndicate's precious cargo awaited. It was a massive container, sealed with a complex security system. "Chip, get to work," Callus ordered through his comms. "We need that container open." Chip's voice came through the speakers with static. "Working on it, Captain. But this is a tough nut to crack." We took up defensive positions around the container, bracing ourselves for a counterattack. The Obsidian Syndicate wouldn't give up their cargo without a fight. The minutes ticked by, and the tension was almost unbearable. Then a triumphant shout pierced the comms. "Got it!" Chip exclaimed. "The container is open!" Callus grinned, his eyes gleaming with greed. "Let's see what we've got here!" He approached the container, his weapon lowered. The rest of us followed, our hearts pounding with anticipation. Callus reached out and touched the container's surface. Suddenly, a blinding light erupted from within, engulfing us all. I awoke with a pounding headache and a disorientation that transcended mere physical space. The cargo bay was in disarray, scorch marks marring the walls and a haze of smoke lingering in the air. Callus was nowhere to be seen, and the mercenaries who had accompanied us were sprawled unconscious on the floor. Bruiser was the first to stir, groaning as he pushed himself up on one elbow. "What the hell happened?" he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "I don't know," I replied, scanning the area for clues. "Something happened when we opened the container." Chip emerged from behind a stack of crates, his face pale and his eyes wide with alarm. The container, it emitted some kind of energy. It fried my systems, knocked everyone out. I helped him to his feet. "Did you see where Callus went?" He shook his head. "He was right next to me when it happened. One minute he was there, the next, gone." A chilling dread settled over me. We were trapped in enemy territory, our captain missing, and who knew what kind of volatile cargo we had just unleashed. "We need to find Callus," I said, my voice firm. "And we need to figure out what's in that container." We roused the other mercenaries and cautiously approached the container. It was still glowing faintly. Bruiser, never one to shy away from a challenge, reached out and touched the container's surface. He recoiled instantly, a pained cry escaping his lips. "It's hot!" he exclaimed, shaking his hand. Chip scrambled for his toolkit, muttering to himself. Energy readings off the charts. Unknown origin. Potentially hazardous. I kept my rifle trained on the container, my finger hovering over the trigger. Whatever was inside it was clearly not meant for human eyes. Suddenly, the container's hum intensified and the light within grew brighter. A portal materialized in the air above it, swirling with colors. A figure emerged from the portal, tall and gaunt, cloaked in shadows. "You have disturbed something ancient and powerful," it said. "Something that should have remained dormant." It raised a skeletal hand, and a wave of energy engulfed us, searing my skin and filling my mind with nightmarish visions. I stumbled backward, my rifle clattering to the floor. The figure advanced, its eyes fixed on me with intensity. "You are the key," it hissed, its voice dripping with venom. "The vessel for our ascension." I felt a surge of primal terror, an instinctual urge to flee, but my legs refused to move, rooted to the spot by an unseen force. The figure reached out, its hand closing around my throat. I gasped for air, my vision dimming. Then a deafening battle cry filled the cargo hold. Something moving incredibly fast slammed into the figure, knocking it off its feet. Bruiser stood over the fallen entity, his cybernetic arm glowing with raw power. "Not today, freak," he growled, his voice thick with rage. The figure scrambled to its feet, its eyes burning with hatred. It lunged at Bruiser, its hands slashing through the air. But Bruiser was ready. He met the creature's attack with a savage fury, his fists pounding into its flesh, his cybernetic arm surging with energy. The battle raged across the cargo hold. I struggled to regain my footing, my mind reeling from the encounter. The figure unleashed a torrent of energy blasts, but Bruiser deflected them with his cybernetic arm. He closed the distance, grabbing the creature by the throat and lifting it off the ground. With a mighty roar, he slammed the figure into the container. The portal winked out of existence, leaving only the wreckage of the cargo and the unconscious form of our attacker. We stood panting, our bodies battered and bruised, our minds scarred by the ordeal. But we were alive. We had survived. I looked at Bruiser, a newfound respect filling my gaze. "Thanks," I said. He grunted in response, his chest heaving. "We're not out of the woods yet," he said, his eyes scanning the shadows. "We need to get out of here, now!" "We need to get back to the shuttle," I said. "Chip, can you get the engines running?" He nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Give me a few minutes. Systems are still rebooting." While Chip worked his magic, Bruiser and I dragged the unconscious figure to a corner of the cargo hold. It was humanoid in shape, but its skin was grey, and its limbs were abnormally long and thin. Its face was obscured by a tattered hood, but I could sense a malevolent aura emanating from it. "What is that thing?" Bruiser asked, his voice laced with disgust. "I don't know," I replied, "but it's not from around here." We secured the figure with restraints salvaged from the damaged cargo, then turned our attention to the wreckage of the container. Shards of metal and glass were scattered across the floor, along with fragments of some unknown substance. I cautiously picked up one of the fragments, examining it closely. It was smooth and cold to the touch, and it seemed to vibrate with an inner energy. "Don't touch that!" Chip shouted, rushing towards me. "It could be unstable!" I dropped the fragment. "Sorry," I muttered, backing away. Chip carefully gathered up the fragments, placing them in a containment unit. "We need to analyze this," he said, his voice grave. "It could be the key to understanding what happened here." Just then, the ship's alarms blared to life, their shrill wail cutting through the tension. "Hostiles inbound!" a voice crackled over the comms. "Multiple contacts on approach." We exchanged worried glances. The Obsidian Syndicate had undoubtedly detected our intrusion and was sending reinforcements. "Chip, how long until we can launch?" I asked, my voice urgent. "Almost there," he replied, his fingers flying across his console. "Just a few more systems to bypass." I grabbed my rifle and joined Bruiser at the entrance to the cargo hold. We braced ourselves for the inevitable onslaught. Moments later, the first wave of Obsidian Syndicate mercenaries stormed into the cargo hold, their weapons blazing. We returned fire, taking cover behind crates and machinery. We held our ground, mowing down the attackers one by one. But their numbers were overwhelming. We were slowly being pushed back, our ammunition dwindling. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently, throwing us off balance. "Chip!" I shouted into my comms. "What's happening?" His voice came back, strained with effort. "Engines are online! We're taking off!" I grabbed Bruiser and dragged him towards the shuttle bay, dodging blaster fire as we went. We reached the shuttle just as Chip fired the engines, and we blasted off into the void, leaving the Obsidian Syndicate's ship behind. Back aboard the Dark Star, the atmosphere was heavy with relief and apprehension. Chip huddled over his console, monitoring the ship's systems and scanning for pursuit. Bruiser stood guard over the unconscious figure, his cybernetic arm whirring softly. The mercenaries who had accompanied us on the raid nursed their injuries in silence. I found myself drawn to the containment unit where Chip had stored the fragments. The faint light emanating from them seemed to call to me, a siren song of the unknown. "Don't get too close," Chip warned, not looking up from his work. "We still don't know what we're dealing with." I ignored his caution, reaching out to touch the surface of the container. A tingling sensation coursed through my fingertips, and I felt a strange connection to the fragments within. It was as if they were trying to communicate with me, their whispers haunting the back of my mind. "Razor, step away!" Bruiser growled, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. I reluctantly withdrew my hand, but the sensation lingered. "Damn it," I muttered, pacing the deck. "We can't stay out here forever. We need to find a safe haven." Just then, the ship's intercom came to life. "Attention all crew!" Callus's voice boomed through the speakers. "Report to the bridge immediately!" We exchanged bewildered glances. Callus was alive, but how? And where had he been? Questions swirling in my mind, I followed Chip and Bruiser to the bridge. We found Callus seated in the captain's chair, his face pale and drawn, his eyes filled with a newfound intensity. "Welcome back, Captain," I said, unable to hide the suspicion in my voice. "Care to explain your sudden disappearance?" Callus raised a hand, silencing my inquiry. "I have much to tell you," he said, his voice weak. "But first, we need to get out of here." He gestured towards the viewport, where a fleet of Obsidian Syndicate warships had materialized, their weapons trained on the Dark Star. "Chip, can you outrun them?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not a chance. They're faster and more maneuverable." Callus stood, his eyes blazing with defiance. "Then we'll fight," he declared. He turned to the crew, his voice ringing with authority. "Prepare for battle. This is our moment to shine. Let's show them what the Dark Star is made of." A cheer erupted from the crew, their fear momentarily replaced by a surge of adrenaline. They rushed to their stations, weapons at the ready. I took my place beside Callus, my rifle gripped tightly in my hand. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. We were in for the fight of our lives. The Dark Star shuddered as the first volley of enemy fire slammed into its shields. Chip, his face bathed in the eerie glow of the control panel, frantically adjusted power levels and rerouted energy to damaged sections. "Shields are holding, but they won't last long," he yelled, his voice strained with effort. Callus barked orders. "Gunnery crews, open fire! Target their lead ships! Evasive maneuvers, maximum thrust!" The Dark Star lurched violently as it swerved to avoid incoming fire, its guns blazing in retaliation. Brilliant streaks of energy lanced through the void, impacting enemy ships with explosive force. I braced myself against the console. I had never seen combat on this scale before, and the sheer intensity of it was almost overwhelming. A nearby explosion rocked the ship, sending me sprawling to the floor. I scrambled to my feet, my ears ringing. The bridge was filled with smoke and the acrid scent of ozone. "Razor, report!" Callus's voice crackled through the comms. "I'm okay," I replied, my voice hoarse. "What's the situation?" "We've taken heavy damage, but we've managed to cripple several of their ships. Keep fighting!" I crawled back to my station, my hands shaking. I took aim at the nearest enemy fighter and squeezed the trigger. My pulse rifle bucked, sending a bolt of energy hurtling towards the target. The fighter exploded in a fiery ball, but another quickly took its place. The Obsidian Syndicate's forces attacked continuously, coming from all sides. The Dark Star's shields finally gave way, and the ship's hull shuddered under a barrage of direct hits. Chip screamed in pain as a stray bolt of energy scorched his arm. "I'm hit!" he cried, clutching his wound. "I can't maintain the systems." Callus rushed to his side, his face grim. "Hang in there, Chip, we need you." He turned to me, his eyes filled with desperation. "Razor, get to engineering and help Chip. We need those shields back up." I nodded, scrambling towards the exit. I made my way through the smoke-filled corridors. The ship's interior was a scene of utter chaos. Crew members were frantically trying to repair damaged systems, while others battled fires that raged through the decks. I finally reached engineering, where Chip was slumped against a console, his face pale and clammy. I knelt beside him, checking his pulse. It was weak but steady. "Chip, can you hear me?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the din of battle. He groaned, his eyes fluttering open. "The main power conduit is severed," he said. "We need to reroute the energy flow, or the shields will remain offline." I nodded, my mind racing. I had a rudimentary understanding of the ship's systems, but this was beyond my expertise. "Just tell me what to do," I said, my voice determined. "I'll get it done." Chip gave me a series of instructions, his voice growing weaker with each word. I followed his guidance, my fingers fumbling with unfamiliar controls. Finally, with a surge of power, the shields surged back to life. A cheer erupted from the bridge as the Dark Star regained its defenses. I turned to Chip, relief flooding over me, but my relief was short-lived. He was slumped against the console, his eyes closed, his breath shallow. "Chip," I said, shaking him gently. "Chip, wake up!" But there was no response. He was gone. I slammed my fist against the console, the metal groaning under the impact. Chip, the ship's lifeline, had paid the ultimate price. "Razor, get back to the bridge!" Callus's voice commanded over the comms. "We need you up here!" With a heavy heart, I left Chip's body in the care of the engineering crew and made my way back to the bridge. The fighting had intensified, and the Dark Star was taking a beating. Smoke filled the air, and the floor vibrated with the impact of enemy fire. Callus was barking orders, his face etched with the strain of battle. Bruiser stood beside him, his cybernetic arm crackling with energy as he operated one of the ship's turrets. "Status report," Callus demanded as I entered the bridge. "Shields are up, but they're fluctuating," I replied. "Chip is gone." A shadow passed over Callus's face, but he quickly masked it with a steely resolve. "We'll mourn him later," he said, his voice gruff. "Right now, we need to focus on survival." He turned to Bruiser. "Status of the enemy?" "We've thinned their numbers, but they're still coming," Bruiser replied, his voice a low growl. "They just keep coming." Callus nodded grimly. "Prepare to disengage," he ordered. "We're going to make a run for it." The Dark Star lurched as its engines surged to life, propelling us away from the battle. The Obsidian Syndicate's ships pursued, their weapons blazing, but we managed to outmaneuver them, weaving through asteroid fields and utilizing scattered remnants as cover. "Where are we headed?" I asked Callus. "To a place where they won't find us," he replied cryptically. "A place where we can regroup and plan our next move." He turned to me, his eyes glinting with a strange light. "And where we can unlock the secrets of that container." His words sent a shiver down my spine. I knew that the events on the transport vessel were far from over. The mysterious figure, the energy pulse, the fragments, they were all connected, pieces of a puzzle that I was only beginning to understand. We traveled for days, jumping from system to system, always staying one step ahead of the Obsidian Syndicate. During that time, I learned more about Callus's past, his ambitions, and the true nature of the cargo we had recovered. It was a relic of an ancient civilization, a source of immense power and knowledge. Callus believed that it could change the course of history, and he was willing to do whatever it took to harness its potential. But I had my doubts. The power within the relic was dark and dangerous, and I feared that Callus was being consumed by its influence. But I had no choice but to trust Callus for now. We had a common enemy, and our survival depended on our ability to work together. But I knew that our alliance was fragile, built on a foundation of mutual self-interest and a shared desire for power. The Dark Star descended towards the moon's surface, its engines thrumming with anticipation. I had no idea what awaited us on this barren rock, but I was ready for whatever came our way. "Welcome to Sanctuary," Callus announced. "Our new home, at least for the time being." We disembarked, the crunch of our boots on the regolith the only sound in the silence. The air was thin and cold, stinging my lungs with each breath. Callus led us to a cluster of prefabricated structures nestled in the shadow of a towering cliff face. They were crude and utilitarian, but they offered shelter from the harsh environment. "This was once a mining outpost," Callus explained, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "Abandoned centuries ago. It's the perfect hideout." He gestured towards a hangar that had been carved into the cliffside. "We'll store the Dark Star there. It'll be safe from prying eyes." As the crew began unloading supplies and setting up camp, I found myself drawn to a secluded alcove overlooking the landscape. Callus joined me moments later, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, his voice surprisingly soft. If you say so, I replied, my gaze fixed on the lifeless terrain. He chuckled. You'll learn to appreciate it. There's a certain tranquility in desolation. I turned to face him, my eyes narrowed. I'm more concerned about the entity we encountered, and the relic. Callus's smile faded. Yes, he said, his voice grave. We have much to discuss. He led me to a laboratory within one of the structures. In the center of the room, resting on a metal table, was the containment unit holding the fragments from the shattered container. Chip was right, Callus said, his eyes fixed on the fragments. This is no ordinary artifact. It's a conduit to another dimension, a gateway to unimaginable power. And the entity? I asked. What was it? Callus hesitated for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. It was a harbinger, he finally said, a herald of a coming storm. He turned to face me, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. We have stumbled upon something far greater than ourselves, Razor. Something that could change the course of history. He paused, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But we must be careful. This power is not to be trifled with. It can corrupt, consume, destroy. I met his gaze. I knew that Callus was right. The relic was a double-edged sword, a source of both immense power and unspeakable danger. But I also knew that we couldn't ignore it. We had to unlock its secrets to understand its true nature. What do you propose we do? I asked. Callus smiled, a predatory glint in his eyes. We study it, he said. We experiment. We push the boundaries of what is possible. He paused, his smile widening. And we become gods. Sanctuary's serenity was shattered by a deafening roar. The ground trembled as explosions ripped through the base, sending plumes of dust into the air. Callus's eyes narrowed, his voice cold and sharp as he barked orders into his comm unit. Red alert! All hands to battle stations, this is not a drill! I grabbed my rifle and raced outside, Bruiser and the remaining mercenaries close behind. The sight that greeted us was chaos. Obsidian Syndicate dropships descended from the sky, disgorging squads of heavily armed troops. Laser fire crisscrossed the battlefield, leaving smoking craters in its wake. Hold the line! I yelled, taking cover behind a pile of crates. Don't let them breach the perimeter! We unleashed a torrent of return fire, cutting down the advancing mercenaries. Bruiser charged into the fray, his mechanized arm whirring as it tore through flesh and metal. The battle raged for hours, a brutal dance of death under the pale light of the dying star. Our numbers dwindled, our ammunition ran low, but we fought with the ferocity of the damned. In the midst of the chaos, a piercing scream traveled across the battlefield. It was a sound I'd never heard before, a mix of pain and rage. I turned to see the captured entity, its restraints shattered, its body contorted in agony. Its eyes burned with an unholy light as it unleashed a wave of energy that sent mercenaries flying through the air. "Contain it!" Callus shouted. "Don't let it escape!" But it was too late. The entity rose into the air, its form distorting. It let out another ear-splitting shriek, and the ground beneath us began to tremble. Fissures opened in the earth, swallowing mercenaries and equipment alike. The Obsidian Syndicate forces, caught off guard by this unexpected turn of events, faltered in their assault. Their ranks broke, and they began to retreat in disarray. Callus, seeing an opportunity, rallied the remaining mercenaries. "Push forward!" he shouted. "Drive them back!" We surged forward, our battle cries mingling with the entity's screams. The Obsidian Syndicate, demoralized and disoriented, were no match for our renewed onslaught. We drove them back to their dropships, forcing them to flee in disgrace. As the last of the enemy ships vanished into the sky, an eerie silence descended upon the battlefield. The only sound was the crackling of dying fires and the groans of the wounded. We made our way back to the lab, cautiously approaching the entity. It was still levitating in the air, its body racked with spasms, but its eyes were now fixed on us, burning with a chilling intelligence. "You seek to harness the power of the relic," it uttered, its voice carrying a haunting vibrancy. "But you do not understand its true nature. Callus stepped forward, his voice laced with arrogance. "We will learn its secrets," he declared. "We will bend it to our will." The entity tilted its head, a sardonic smile twisting its lips. "Very well," it said. "I will show you the path to power. But be warned, the price may be more than you are willing to pay." The entity, now seemingly composed, glided towards the containment unit, its movements unnervingly smooth. It reached out a long, slender finger and touched the surface. The fragments inside vibrated, their radiance growing stronger. "The relic is damaged," the entity intoned, its voice hollow in the confines of the lab. "But it can be repaired, and when it is, it will open a pathway to my homeworld." Callus's eyes widened with avarice. "Your homeworld," he breathed. "A realm of power and knowledge." "Indeed," the entity confirmed. "A realm where you can transcend your mortal limitations and achieve true greatness." Callus's grin stretched wider, revealing teeth stained with the grime of countless starports. "Then let us repair this relic," he declared, his voice brimming with eagerness. "Lead us to your homeworld, and we shall claim our rightful place among the gods." Under the entity's guidance, we set to work, piecing together the shattered fragments of the relic. The process was slow and arduous, requiring intricate manipulations of energy and matter. But as the pieces slotted into place, the relic's power intensified, filling the lab with a radiating energy. Finally, with a blinding flash of light, the relic was complete. A swirling vortex of energy erupted from its core, opening a portal that beckoned us with promises of untold wonders. Callus, his face alight with a mad fervor, stepped through the portal without hesitation. Bruiser and the remaining mercenaries followed, their eyes wide with awe and apprehension. I hesitated, a knot of unease tightening in my gut. Something about this felt wrong, too easy. But the allure of power was strong, and the desire for answers even stronger. With a deep breath, I stepped through the portal, the world dissolving into a kaleidoscope of colors and sensations. When my vision cleared, I found myself standing in a vast alien landscape. The sky was a swirling vortex of nebulae, the ground a patchwork of crystalline formations. Callus and the others were nowhere to be seen. I called out their names, but my voice was swallowed by the silence. Suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way and I plunged into a seemingly bottomless chasm. I landed with a bone-jarring thud, the impact knocking the wind out of me. As I struggled to rise, the world around me shifted and warped. I saw flashes of my past, the traumas and tragedies that had shaped me into the hardened mercenary I had become. I relived the deaths of my loved ones, the betrayals, the countless battles fought in the name of greed and survival. Each memory was a knife twisting in my gut. I screamed, my fingers digging into the ground as pain and regret washed over me. But there was no escape. This was my hell, a personal purgatory where I was condemned to relive my worst nightmares for all eternity. The chasm amplified the entity's laughter, a sound that chilled me to the bone. "Welcome to your new reality, Razor," it taunted. "This is your reward for your ambition. You sought power, and now you shall have it. The power to suffer, to relive your failures over and over again." I sank to my knees, my body racked with sobs. The entity had tricked us, lured us to this hellish realm with false promises of power and glory. I had been a fool. And now, I would pay the price for my folly. Time lost all meaning in the abyss. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, and months into an eternity of torment. I was trapped in the entity's twisted playground, forced to relive my failures, my regrets, my sins. Each cycle began with the blinding flash of the relic's activation, the disorienting journey through the portal, and the plunge into the chasm. Then came the onslaught of memories, the agonizing parade of my past mistakes. I saw myself as a child, watching helplessly as my parents were gunned down by pirates. I relived the moment I took my first life, the cold thrill of violence that had become my addiction. I witnessed the countless betrayals and double crosses that had marked my career as a mercenary. Each cycle ended with the entity's mocking laughter. I was a prisoner in my own mind, a puppet dancing to the strings of a sadistic puppeteer. I tried to fight back, to resist the entity's control, but my efforts were futile. I was trapped in an endless loop of torment, a cycle of pain with no end in sight. My body withered, my spirit broken. I became a hollow shell, a spectre haunting the ruins of my former self. The only constant was the entity's presence, its gaze a perpetual reminder of my fate. I had been a fool to trust it, a fool to believe its promises of power and glory. I had traded my soul for a fleeting glimpse of greatness, and now I was paying the price. In the end, there was no redemption, no escape. Only the endless torment, the eternal recurrence of my darkest moments. And as I sank deeper into the abyss, I realized that this was my punishment, my penance for a lifetime of violence and greed. I had embraced the darkness, and now the darkness had consumed me. I was Razor, the mercenary, the killer, the damned, and this was my hell.